Welcome everyone! For this week's Maker Mindset video, we're going to explore the very basics of weaving using some materials you can probably find around the house. Now, let's gather some supplies listed and let's get started. To begin, weaving is the craft of interlacing threads, in this case I have yarn, and a pattern in order to make a fabric or a textile object. You can also use different materials like twine, string, raffia, roving, whatever you have laying around the house, so get creative. Now, to create a weaving, we must first start by making a loom to support our threads. Use a small square or rectangular piece of cardboard, and then use a ruler to make half-inch incremental marks on the top and bottom of your board. After you make those marks, let's go ahead and take a pair of scissors, and you're going to make small cuts on top of those marks. What this is going to do is it's going to allow us to form tabs in our cardboard so that we can attach some string to make a warp. A warp refers to the lengthwise thread that run up and down a piece of fabric to form the foundational structure of the weaving. To make our warp, use a piece of yarn, I have cotton twine, and tape the tail end of the string to the back of your board. Next, slide the string through the first slit on one end of the board, and then bring the string down the front of the board and slide it behind the slit that's across from the first slit that you went through. Now, moving to the right, hook that string around the back of the cardboard, then back through the next slit in order to bring the string back through the front of the board. Now keep repeating this step until your string has been fed through each slot and the whole front of the board has vertical strings across it. Now, tape down the tail end of the string and the back of the board, and your warp is finished. Mind you, for this step, you're going to want to make sure these threads are relatively tight. Next, we'll move on to the weft. The weft refers to the crosswise threads that were worked over and under the warp threads. Go ahead and choose your first color of yarn or whichever material you decide to use, and we're going to start by feeding it over your first warp string. Then, feed it under the next warp string. We're going to repeat this pattern of over and under until we reach the end of our first row of warp strings. Then, pull your material through until you only have a 3-inch long tail left on the side in which you started. To move on to the second row of weft, simply use the remainder of your yarn to continue the pattern above. If you ended last on under, bring your yarn over on the warp thread and keep working in the other direction. Keep this pattern going until you run out of yarn or you want to switch materials. If you'd like to use a different color of yarn or a new piece of material, you have options for how to do this. First, you can start a new piece of yarn the same way we started the weft at the very beginning, leaving a tail when you begin that piece. Or, sometimes I just like to tie my new piece onto my old piece of yarn because I like the way the little knots create texture in what I'm working on. It's totally up to you. Experiment with different ways to do things and just have fun with it. When you're working on something that's small, sometimes it gets a little cumbersome to use your fingers to keep pulling your thread over and under. So, if you have a pencil nearby, try taping the end of that yarn to your pencil and use it as a shuttle. This helps you get over and under those tight warp threads a little bit easier. Now, as you're accumulating layers of yarn, make sure that you're mushing these different rows together so that they're nice and tight. Think of it like a blanket. You don't want holes in your blanket, right? You're going to want them to be nice and tight together. All right, now that you've spent all that time on your beautiful weaving, you're probably wondering how to get this thing off this piece of cardboard. It's actually pretty easy. Flip the cardboard over and look at the warp threads hooked onto the back of the cardboard on the end you first started on. Simply slide those loops off the tabs and push your rows of weft threads down until all the loops are integrated into the weaving. Then, untape the warp end on this side of the cardboard and tie it into another warp string to secure it. Now for the other end of your warp threads, go ahead and slide those loops off of your cardboard. Once you get all those loops taken off, you're going to use your scissors to trim each loop in the center. After you trim each of the loops, you're going to tie each string together in pairs. Make sure that you get them pretty tight on your weft rows, because remember, you don't want any saggy weft. So now that your beautiful weaving is off of the loom, you can choose to leave it as is, or you can go back and tuck those end pieces that we left earlier. To do this, simply flip your weaving over and separate the different layers of weft until you find a piece of the warp. Pull back the end piece and secure it under the warp string that you found. This will hold it in place. Then just trim off any excess yarn that you don't want to be visible. You can use this simple at-home weaving technique to make anything from coasters to bookmarks. Get wild experimenting with various colors, textures, and materials. The possibilities are literally endless. Hope you had fun. Happy weaving, everybody!